Today I'm going to show you how I painted this Krieger using only these colors. This experiment was inspired by Swedish painter Anders Zorn, who famously utilized a palette of only yellow, red, and black. And he was able to create masterpieces in art using only these colors. And that's because he understood how colors interacted with one another, how they sat in relation to one another, and he understood values. So let's see how Anders Zorn would paint a Warhammer mini. First, I start out with a nice purple base coat for the trench coat. Now, I made this purple by mixing the black and the red. And this is important because the purple is going to show up really nicely in the shadows. And this is going to give a lot of extra depth to the miniature. Once we throw on that green on top of this, it's going to make everything look really deep. The nice contrasting colors between the purple and the green is really going to make everything pop. So just make sure that I coat everything thoroughly, and I'm doing this with really thin coats, and I'm going to do multiple passes. And we'll speed things up just so I can do multiple passes here. We really want to build this saturation. The saturation in the shadows is going to help sell the effect. It's going to help sell that green coat on top of this dark purple underlayer. And once we're done, this is what it should look like. It's a really muted purple color, which is going to be great for our shadow layer. So on top of that, I am mixing on my palette some black and some yellow, and that's going to give us green. A lot of black pigments, they will have a blue undertone, so mixing them with yellow is going to give us this nice green color. And we just start by applying this to the mini in an inconspicuous area so we can test what that color looks like. And you'll see here I'm not too happy with that. It's a little too bright to start out with. So I throw some extra black in there just to mute it down a little bit, darken it up, because I want to sneak up on this base coat layer on this mid-tone. And I thin my paints a lot for this, because I'm just doing like a glaze consistency and multiple passes to sneak up on that opacity, sneak up on that color. This way, everything's going to blend together a lot more, and it's going to look a lot more natural once every color is in place. We want to leave some of these purple tones showing through. Kind of want to leave as much as possible without making it look like the coat is actually purple. That's just going to take some experimentation to find out. But again, we're going to sneak up on this opacity with multiple thin layers of paint here, and that's going to help us build nice contrast and nice colors. So here I am going through every part of the model and just laying on a little bit of this paint. And with each subsequent layer, I'm covering slightly less than the previous layer. Again, so it sneaks up on that. It kind of gives us a little bit of a blend through glazing like this. And it all looks really muted to start out with, but the important thing to consider here is that colors don't exist in a vacuum. So you can see here I've added a little bit more yellow to this, and I started painting again on less area than I did on the previous layer. And by adding more yellow, it increases the saturation and the contrast, these contrasting colors. Again, it's going to look a little drab when we're first starting out, but it's really important to note that the colors do not exist in a vacuum. They all play against each other, and the mind, kind of plays tricks on us and fills in the gaps where it needs to. So then I add a little bit more yellow to this green mixture, and I'm going to start painting this on, again, being even more selective of where I place this and covering even less of the model. I add a little bit of white to that to, kind kind of boost the highlights here. Also, you'll note that I'm using a stippling method. It's kind of stippling dots and dashes. Painting cloths, this is a really easy way to kind of sell the texture of the cloth just by using the paint. And here you can see the colors are starting to come to life. Again, we're just sneaking up on it, layer after layer, going through and increasing that saturation, increasing that vibrancy. And let's increase it some more and add even more yellow. And now you can really see it starting to come through. Just focusing on the most raised edges of the model here. And again, that stippling pattern is going to really sell the effect that this is cloth. Okay, now it's time to move on to the leather parts. So we're going to make some brown. When we do that by mixing the red and the yellow, and of course a little bit of black. Find a color that you think you're happy with on the palette. And then again, find an inconspicuous spot on the model to give it a test. We need to see what this color looks like in relation to everything else that's already been painted. So you can see here, that looks a little bright to start out with. I'm going to tone it down quite a bit with some black so that we have a more smooth transition into these lighter colors. And that looks much better. So we'll cover everything that should be leather brown in this color. Same as the trench coat, we're going to do multiple passes, and with each pass cover less and less of the model. Lighten it up a bit and cover even less area. Now we lighten it up even more. And again, really focusing on the most raised edges at this point. And we'll slow down a little bit here for the backpack because this is a nice way to get a, weathered leather look. Just kind of stippling the edges here with a really thin coat of paint. This is going to breathe a lot of life into the model as opposed to just doing edge highlighting. Gives it a more painterly look, which is exactly what we're going for because we took inspiration from the Swedish painter Anders Zorn. Just keep lightening it up. Saturate it with some yellow and some white, and again, slow down a little bit so we can look at the backpack. And we cover even less area with just that stippling motion, kind of dots and dashes. You want to breathe some life into these models. It really helps, kind of sell that they're living things as opposed to just, comic book kind of characters all edge highlighted and looking perfect. Here I mix a little bit extra red into this mixture because I wanted to differentiate the wood on his las gun from all the leather. I didn't want it to look like he was holding a leather rifle. And I just paint everything that should be wood, including this little canister on his backpack, which I decided is made out of wood. And it's really just the same process. We keep doing it. And now we're doing it with the metal parts, and that's just black and white. Make gray, and again, focusing on the more raised edges and hitting with multiple passes. Using the stippling again on these metal bits is going to make it look a lot more battle worn instead of just pristine. Really important to keep all the paints really thin and slowly build up this opacity. You can see I start my brush stroke where I want the least amount of paint to be deposited, and I end my brush stroke where I want the most paint to be deposited. And this is where I try to hit his eye goggles. Still that stippling, little dots and dash. It's important to paint this part of the helmet, this like crown and these curves. A lot of light would catch here, and this is an often overlooked part of models, in my opinion, is the curvature on the helmets. And another thing this will do is it'll help draw the eye towards the face, which typically we want as a focal point. It's a natural focal point anyway. Humans are drawn to faces, so we'll just accentuate it with making sure that we put a lot of contrast here and a little bit of extra work up on the head and in the face. And again, just lighten it up and sneak up on this highlight color. Now we're getting into really bright white, so it's even more important that we paint less and less of the model. And just keep building that opacity. All right, there we have every part of the model covered in paint, and now we can finally look at all of these colors and how they interact together. Now I'll say it again, but colors don't exist in a vacuum. So now that we understand where all these colors lie, we can really start focusing on boosting that contrast and making the whole model pop. We'll really focus on the highlights now. You can see we've added even more yellow to the paint for the coat, and that's because it just needed a little bit of a boost once everything else was painted. Now, in my opinion, this is probably the most important step, and this is once everything really starts to come together. And doing it this way also helps keep everything cohesive. Let me throw the finishing touches on. And there we have it. Art Krieger inspired by the limited palette of Anders Zorn. You can see the shadows are really deep, and that's because that contrasting color of the warm purples contrasted against these greens really helps throw the shadows further back, so to speak, and pulls the lighter yellows forward. And I think we have a model that Anders Zorn would be proud of.